Paper markets didn't wobble, they snapped. On January 20th, while the world was focused elsewhere, an executive order landed that didn't adjust the system. It bypassed it. In a single stroke, silver was pulled out of the category of ordinary commodities and redefined as a strategic monetary metal tied to national security. That sounds bureaucratic. It wasn't. It detonated a pricing structure that had been quietly propped up for more than half a century. Here's the contradiction. On screens, prices still existed. In balance sheets, hundreds of billions in banking value vanished. Calm numbers, violent damage. This matters to you because this wasn't about silver enthusiasts or niche markets. It was about whether the prices you see are anchored to something real or just sustained by agreement. If one executive order can expose that gap, then silver isn't the risk. Confidence is. The order triggered vault audits and cut off specific emergency backstops. Systems only do that when internal trust is already fractured. And when trust breaks in one corner of finance, it doesn't stay there. It spreads. What made this moment dangerous wasn't the announcement, it was how incomplete it was. The order didn't arrive with a full explanation of consequences, timelines, or exposure. It changed the rules without unwinding the game already in progress. Silver was redefined, but the mountain of existing paper contracts was left standing. That's where the pattern appears. This wasn't an isolated intervention. It fit a broader trend of authorities stepping in when markets drift too far from physical limits. Not to resolve them immediately, but to freeze them in place long enough to assess the damage. Here's the question that reframes everything. If a market only functions because no one is allowed to test delivery at scale, is it actually liquid? Or is it a confidence structure that survives by discouraging verification? The reclassification altered legal treatment while existing positions remained active. That creates tension between paper claims and physical supply without a release valve. Notice what didn't happen next. No reassurance about inventories. No public accounting of obligations. No clear signal about who absorbs losses if delivery is demanded. That silence isn't neutral, it's pressure building. The next claim cut straight through the noise. The paper-silver market had grown far larger than the silver itself. That sounds exaggerated until you look at the structure described in the material. A small cluster of global banks carried massive short positions measured in the hundreds of millions of ounces. At the same time, the amount of registered metal available for delivery sat far below that number. Short exposure was described as more than 10 times the available physical inventory. That means one real ounce was supporting multiple promises. Here's what that signals. As long as no one forced delivery, leverage worked. Prices stayed contained, risk stayed hidden, but the executive order didn't just change classification. It removed the ability to endlessly defend price by expanding paper supply. That's when the imbalance stopped being theoretical. Notice what wasn't challenged publicly. No institution disputed the size of the exposure. No one confirmed the metal was ready for delivery. No clear plan was offered for what happens if even a fraction of holders ask for the real thing. And once a market is revealed to be structurally short of reality, price stops being information. It becomes a warning. What followed wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was something quieter and more revealing. Adjustments began appearing where rules used to be fixed. Delivery terms were softened. Procedures were reinterpreted. Trading didn't end, it changed shape. This is how systems signal stress without admitting failure. Instead of saying something is broken, they normalize exceptions. Instead of confronting shortages, they manage expectations. It has happened before in smaller commodity squeezes where time was bought by changing settlement rules and delaying delivery. The difference here is scale. This wasn't a speculative spike or a single bad actor. It was a structural imbalance that had been allowed to grow for decades, and now it was being managed, not solved. Here's the part nobody is saying out loud. When extraordinary measures become routine, markets stop reflecting reality. They start reflecting containment. Contracts still exist, but their meaning changes. Delivery becomes optional. Settlement becomes flexible. And once that shift happens, trust doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes, and erosion is how escalation begins. The next evidence point was impossible to ignore because behavior contradicted the messaging. Publicly, institutions spoke about order and stability. Privately, actions told a different story. Physical delivery obligations were reclassified. In some cases, they were suspended. Cash settlement quietly replaced metal. Force majeure style clauses were invoked to convert delivery into cash. Key institutions pulled back from physical trading while prices remained quoted. That gap matters. If inventories are sufficient, you don't avoid delivery. If supply is real, you don't rewrite obligations midstream. Those moves only make sense when the asset itself is scarce and time is being bought. Here's why that detail changes everything. Cash settlement assumes the quoted price reflects reality. But the moment physical delivery is bypassed, price stops measuring value and starts performing a function. It exists to maintain calm, not to clear the market. Notice what never appeared alongside these changes. No transparent audit results, no public reconciliation of claims versus metal, no commitment to restore normal delivery. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. Price screens stop feeling like answers. They start feeling like delay mechanisms. And delays always mean pressure is still building. The pressure didn't arrive in isolation. It stacked fast. Multiple stress points began colliding before any one of them could be resolved. Liquidity measures were discussed, but they were limited. Legal constraints narrowed who could be helped and how. At the same time, exposure kept expanding as physical reality drifted further from paper assumptions. Emergency responses were constrained while losses tied to specific positions could not be absorbed. Risk linked to silver extended into broader derivatives and counterparty relationships. This is the mini crisis zone. Positions can't be closed without driving prices higher. Losses can't be socialized without triggering backlash. And counterparties start watching each other instead of the market. No one wants to move first. Everyone knows someone will have to. Now watch how control starts slipping. When one player steps back, another tightens terms. When one venue pauses, activity migrates elsewhere. Risk doesn't vanish, it concentrates. This isn't panic yet, it's compression, the kind that builds silently until movement becomes unavoidable. Because once enough pressure is trapped in one place, release stops being a choice. This is where the consequences leave balance sheets and enter real life. Because when delivery fails at the core of a market, the damage doesn't stay financial. It moves into production, pricing, and everyday availability. Quietly at first, then all at once. Industrial buyers don't debate theory. They react. When exchanges stop guaranteeing delivery, manufacturers don't wait for clarity. They bypass the system. They secure physical supply directly. They pay whatever it takes because the alternative is shut down. Missed components, broken timelines. Major buyers began abandoning exchange-based sourcing in favor of direct physical contracts. Availability became more important than price. For you, this shows up indirectly. Higher costs embedded into electronics, delays that feel unexplained, products that suddenly cost more or arrive later without warning. Nothing points back to silver on the receipt, but the pressure is already there. There's also a psychological shift. Once people realize contracts don't guarantee outcomes, trust changes, planning becomes defensive, assumptions get rewritten. If this feels familiar, say so in the comments. Because when enough people feel it at once, markets don't just adjust, they rewire. At this point, outrage doesn't explain what's happening. Structure does. Systems don't fail because people panic. They fail because incentives quietly reward behavior that works right up until it doesn't. For years, paper leverage was cheaper than physical inventory. Flexibility was valued over proof. Settlement optionality was treated as efficiency, not fragility. That's the mechanism underneath everything you're seeing. When scarcity is masked, leverage expands. When leverage expands, prices stop reflecting supply and start reflecting belief. And belief holds only as long as no one demands verification at scale. Here's the unsettling insight. This outcome doesn't require conspiracy or coordination. It emerges naturally when markets are optimized for speed instead of resilience, when risk is allowed to roll forward, when exceptions become normal before anyone notices. Delivery flexibility existed long before the breaking point. The system trained itself to function without ever being forced to prove it could deliver. Mainstream coverage focuses on events and personalities, but the real story is mechanical. Once a system learns it can postpone reality, it will, until reality arrives all at once. And when that happens, power shifts away from whoever manages narratives to whoever controls what's real. From here, the trajectory splits, but neither option restores the old normal. One path is containment. Rules keep bending, paper markets remain open, but thinner, quieter, more managed. Prices continue to print, but with fewer participants willing to trust them. Stability is displayed, not rebuilt. It looks functional because stress is being absorbed off stage. The other path is resolution. Delivery pressure increases. Physical markets assert control over pricing. Contracts are rewritten, settled early, or abandoned altogether. Losses surface instead of being deferred. It's disruptive, but it forces alignment between price and reality. Influence has already begun shifting toward venues that require physical settlement. Price discovery is migrating even if institutions haven't acknowledged it yet. What makes this moment volatile is timing. Once enough participants believe the shift is underway, behavior changes in advance. Buyers move early, sellers hesitate, liquidity thins. Each action reinforces the next. Decisions don't need to be announced to matter. They only need to be made. And right now across the system, those decisions are forming. Here's the insight that reframes everything you've just heard. This wasn't a story about silver breaking the system. It was about a system colliding with physical limits it had learned to ignore. For decades, value was defined by agreement, not possession, by confidence, not constraint. That worked only as long as no one forced the issue. Once physical reality matters again, anything priced without it has to adjust, slowly or violently, quietly or all at once. What unfolded here isn't an ending. It's a signal, a warning that markets don't fail when numbers move. They fail when belief does, and belief never collapses on announcement. It erodes through behavior, through exceptions, through quiet rule changes that seem temporary until they aren't. This story isn't finished. It's accelerating. And the next chapter won't be written in headlines or charts. It will be written by who controls what's real. Follow and subscribe if you want to stay ahead of what comes next.